Well, hello and welcome to a series about religion and science. I'll be introducing the topic briefly this morning. The purpose of this series is simply to make some clarifications, especially for many who in our culture feel that faith has become incompatible with modern science. So first of all, let me begin with what this series is not about. It's not about rejecting science. This is not Christian fundamentalism. Discoveries in science provide helpful insights about the universe and life. No believer should reject the findings of science. Secondly, it's not about conflating science and religion. The two should remain different categories of knowledge. Science is a descriptive category and religion a normative category. They ask different questions and come up with different answers for those different questions. The Bible is not a book on science. Galileo knew that. And unfortunately, the church conflated religion and science at the time, and poor Galileo was punished by his own church. Science has certainly implications for religion and morality, but science as a descriptive academic discipline cannot or should not make declarations about ultimate truth, the ultimate truth of God or morality. Science discoveries may stimulate speculation about God, but as soon as the scientist does, he or she has stepped out of their descriptive scientific discipline and enters into one of the normative categories, like philosophy, metaphysics, ethics, and theology. In other words, science measures, describes, tests, experiments, and tries to explain natural phenomena by using analytical tools of research. Scientists' tool bag includes math, tested paradigms and theories, algorithms, and their imagination, none of which exposes the truth of God or ultimate reality. Again, science opens up the conversation about God, morality, metaphysics. But there's nothing in strict science that either proves or disproves God. Now, many may not like that, but that's simply where we're at. For example, science and technology have both positive and negative uses. Scientific knowledge about how to release nuclear energy is neutral, part of the science of physics. It's descriptive. It's humans who must determine how to use this knowledge and technology for good or for bad. Normative ethical core categories, like the use of such power, again, are outside the parameters of strict descriptive science. So while science can make a nuclear bomb, let me catch up. While science can make a nuclear bomb that may kill thousands of people, there's no equations in math that says whether it should be used or not. This is a normative ethical category. Also, what this series is not. It's not about attacking atheists. No follower of Jesus should use his or her knowledge to marginalize or defame other people. And I would suggest that most believers share many of atheists' criticisms of religion. So why not be in dialogue with one another instead of attacking one another? And I would suggest most believers condemn hatred and violence in the name of God. That too has to be clarified. And by the way, there might be considered a positive use of nuclear energy, and there's a destructive use. Who decides? It's not in descriptive science itself. And that's probably why we still need categories like religion and ethics. Now, what this series is about. First, to clarify the relationship between religion and science, to enhance a healthy dialogue rather than absurd attacks, which gets us nowhere. It does not advance either science or religion. And to show, perhaps in this conversation between religion and science, how both can benefit from one another. Secondly, it's to critique misconceptions about science and religion. Bad science or pseudoscience is not science. Bad religion is still religion. It's also to challenge believers and atheists to be less dogmatic and more informed about their beliefs. And yes, atheists have beliefs. The more we learn, the less dogmatic, the more humble we become, and the more prone we are to have conversation rather than arguments. Some of what you're going to learn in this series will force you, believer or non-believer, to reconsider some of your assumptions about reality, let alone science and religion. I would suggest it should be encouraging, especially to believers. Science today has opened up God talk. In fact, it's more like it's blown the lid off. John Hick, a philosopher of religion, now emeritus, said towards the end of the 20th century, he said, "Isn't it amazing that here, close to the 21st century, the universe is religiously ambiguous?" And that was because of what science had disclosed. Believing in a spiritual being that many call God may seem more reasonable after learning some of the new findings in science. After all, science and religion share things in common. Both seek to know the truth. Science about the truth of the natural world through investigation, through the tools of science, and religion, the truth about those things that transcend scientific methods and measurement. Things like ultimate reality, good and bad, the meaning of life, God, metaphysics. Both require the human imagination for this question of truth, and so they share that in common. Now, in fact, there is someone that might inspire us to be open to such dialogue. Very few people in our low-context culture, as anthropologists would describe our culture, define terms, let alone explain what they mean by science or religion. For example, many people say, "I believe in science and not religion." But when I ask someone what they mean by that modern mantra, they have a very difficult time explaining what they mean by science, let alone religion. There's a great deal of confusion, I would suggest. In other words, what does it mean to believe in science? And what are people's definitions of religion? Many of them talk about religion without ever defining it. For example, notice this quote from Dr. Tyson. The good thing about science is that it's true whether you believe it or not. Well, this gets a lot of cheers and accolades, but what does that mean exactly if we were to scrutinize and examine that? Now, I know where people go with this, because religion is in the background of this statement. 30 years ago, I read an article in Newsweek where a scientist wrote saying that scientists don't know science. They knew their particular small area. They were forced to specialize. In my own field, in religious studies, this is true. Many of us have been so forced to look at the minutiae, the specialization, because there's so much there, that it's very difficult to keep up with the general field of religious studies. So this is something also for us to keep in mind. By the way, not all scientists believe that all the branches of science are equally pure. Some speak of a more pure science than another. It sounds very religious to me. Some think of math or chemistry as more scientific or a more pure science. Here again, this confuses and obscures things. So again, I'm using a general definition of science, a discipline that measures, describes, tests, experiments, and tries to explain natural phenomena using analytical tools and methods of research. I do not believe in a pure science. All science has a subjective, human interpretive aspect to it, without which it would only be data. I don't believe in pure objectivity, and I would call anyone in the 21st century to come out of the 19th century if you still believe in pure objectivity. All facts have to be interpreted. How many theories of Big Bang are there? Well, several. Medical science has to use lab and test from science, which we're all thankful for, but it still has to be interpreted. If you get a diagnosis that you have cancer from a lab report and a physician, and they can start treatment, but it doesn't explain what it means for your life. What is the meaning for this? And for that, we have to go outside of science. Now, I believe science is a useful method to know certain things about the physical world and life. In fact, when it comes to knowing how old we anticipate the universe is, we look to physics, with 13.5 to 8 billion years old, not the Bible. But I don't feel comfortable with the blanket statement that science is true. In what regard is science true? For example, in 1997, science believed the universe was slowing down. In 1998, this was falsified with the discovery of dark matter and energy that was determined that the universe was actually accelerating in its expansion. And the fundamentalists who believe that the earth is only 6,000 years old, they mistakenly use the Bible as a science book. This is pseudoscience. It's not science. In fact, it's bad theology, bad hermeneutics. Fundamentalism, I would suggest, has done more damage to religion than atheism in our modern culture. And those who believe science has all the answers and is true in an absolute sense share something in common with fundamentalists. Both are based upon a commitment to a non-scientific ideology, biblical literalism or scientism. Both those who believe in this absolute sense of reality, I think, are subject to criticism. Materialism or physicalism and scientism are not science. They are metaphysical propositions or positions. Now, a glaring example of getting an ideology getting in the way of science comes from many scientists themselves, who are committed to materialism or physicalism, that only matter exists and all thought, mind, and consciousness can be reduced to the physical brain and its chemical electrical functions. But science has not proven that only matter exists. In fact, there's a growing company of scientists, philosophers, who are rejecting this premise that only matter exists. Let me quote a scientist, Dr. Sheldrake. I quote, "The fundamental assumption of materialism turned out to be very questionable when examined in the light of advances in the sciences themselves," unquote. Now, if science is going to suggest that more than matter exists, this in itself opens the door for God talk, like it or not. In fact, a spiritual intelligent being with energy in the universe that human consciousness has rightly perceived from the very first humans may not be such an irrational proposition. The response to humans that there's something else there has been religion, with symbolic gestures like sacred stories, texts, rituals, symbols, sacred trees, etc. And so religion is a human product. It is the creation of human culture. including belief in God or gods. But in response to what? If we put humans back into the center of the universe, perhaps the big brains that we have been gifted with are able to perceive something beyond the material world that now science is suggesting. And just in closing, the modern West is the first culture in the history of the planet to reject spiritual experiences as irrational, meaningless, superstitious bunk. And I think it has, in part, led us down the wrong trail. So next time I'm going to start to discuss some amazing facts from quantum theory, including questions about immortality, time, consciousness. In fact, something that Einstein called spooky.